Imagine waking up in a luxury penthouse to your new stepbrother's sneer, his knife scraping the counter as he whispers, "This is my house, chocolate drop." Hate boils between you, until one stormy night, that rage ignites into a forbidden kiss, bodies crashing like thunder. But as passion turns to plotting, you realize, to claim the fortune, you'll have to bury your parents. Together. What happens when love and murder tangle in the shadows of Manhattan? New York was stirring awake beneath the wail of sirens and the distant growl of taxis rumbling along Madison Avenue, but up in the penthouse on the Upper East Side, a deceptive hush hung in the air. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers I'd once seen in glossy magazines, the kind sourced from antique shops along Fifth Avenue. I stood at the kitchen island, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup edged with gold trim, the steam rising like a fragile promise of normalcy. It was my ritual, this quiet moment before the city demanded everything from me, and today it felt especially precious after the chaos of the wedding just days ago. At 20, my skin glowed like warm cocoa under the morning light, and my dark curls, pulled into a loose bun, swayed gently as I moved. I'd just come back from a run through Central Park, where the paths wound like veins through the green heart of the city, and my leggings still carried the scent of fresh air mixed with urban grit. Sweat cooled on my neck, a reminder that I was still the girl from Brooklyn, not yet fully transformed by this towering glass palace. Mom sat across from me, scrolling through her tablet with news of Milan fashion shows, her fingers tapping lightly. At 40, she looked like she'd barely aged past 30, thanks to those endless afternoons in Beverly Hills salons, where she'd honed her beauty into a weapon. Her laughter rang out, bright and infectious, echoing off the walls as she recounted a funny story from last night's dinner at that spot on Lexington Avenue, the one with the velvet booths and overpriced wine. It was her way of pulling me into this new life, weaving threads of excitement where doubt lingered. I smiled, but inside, a knot tightened. How long could we pretend this blended family wouldn't unravel us all? The penthouse, with its endless views and echoing spaces, felt less like a home and more like a stage set for someone else's drama. "Mom, are you sure this Richard won't turn our lives into one endless corporate dinner?" "I mean, his office downtown, it's like a prison with a view of the Empire State Building," I said, sliding a plate of avocado toast toward her. The words came out lighter than I felt, laced with the sarcasm I'd picked up from Brooklyn stoops. She looked up, her eyes, those expressive almond shapes so like mine, sparkling with that unshakable optimism that had carried us through leaner times. "Sweetheart, he's not just rich, he makes the world spin on his terms. And now, it's spinning for us. Imagine it, yachts in the Hamptons, weekends in Aspen. You're ambitious, Aaliyah, this is your shot to break out of that tiny apartment in Brooklyn." Her voice wrapped around the words like silk, painting pictures of escapes I secretly craved, even as doubt whispered that nothing in this city came without strings. We clinked our cups, the porcelain chiming softly, a toast to futures we both hoped would align. In that instant, the private elevator door whispered open, seamless as a secret, leading straight into the heart of the apartment. Richard stepped in first, tall and commanding, his temples threaded with silver, his Armani suit hugging an athletic frame honed by private trainers and boardroom battles. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who owned pieces of Wall Street, and behind him trailed Dylan, his son from the first marriage, a 20-year-old with tousled blonde hair, clad in faded jeans and a tee sporting some California rock band's logo. Dylan dumped his backpack on the floor with a thud that echoed too loudly in the pristine space, barely glancing at the kitchen as he beelined for the fridge, snatching an energy drink like it was his birthright. Richard swept Mom into a one-armed hug, planting a kiss on her cheek, his smile warm and practiced. "Good morning, ladies. Dylan, say hello properly." There was a paternal edge to his tone, the kind that brooked no real argument, but I could see the weariness in his eyes, the subtle strain of merging worlds. Dylan snorted, eyes glued to his phone screen, thumbs flying over texts from whatever late-night escapade he'd stumbled home from. "Hey," he muttered, the word flat as asphalt. For a split second, his blue eyes flicked up to meet mine, and something sharp flashed there, like a shard of glass catching light, not mere indifference, but a brew of contempt and challenge that made my pulse stutter. I felt my back stiffen instinctively, a reflex from years of navigating stairs in a city that never quite forgot your skin, but I curved my lips into a half-smile, chewing my toast as if it meant nothing. We all settled around the table, the chairs sleek and modern, pulling up to plates of yogurt parfaits and fresh fruit flown in from who knows where. Conversation flowed in fits, Richard outlining his day, a high-stakes meeting on Wall Street, numbers and mergers that blurred into white noise for me, Mom gushing about shopping on Broadway, eyeing designers she'd only window-shopped before, my own interview at that Chelsea gallery, where contemporary art hung like dreams I could almost touch. Dylan stayed silent, poking at his yogurt with a fork, his disinterest a wall thicker than the Hudson. The scene played out like a glossy ad in the New Yorker, elite real estate's promise of seamless luxury, where blended families sipped lattes against a skyline backdrop. Laughter punctuated the air, plans intertwined without friction, and for a heartbeat, I let myself believe it could work. The sun climbed higher, gilding everything in false gold, and as plates cleared, we dispersed like actors exiting stage left, each to our scripts in the city's relentless rhythm. But when the others scattered, Mom to her closet of new wardrobes, Richard to his briefcase of deals, I doubled back to the kitchen for my forgotten phone, its charger cord snaking across the counter like a lifeline. The room felt emptier now, the hum of the espresso machine fading into quiet. That's when I saw him, Dylan, silhouetted against the vast window, staring out at Manhattan's glittering horizon, the spires piercing the sky like accusations. He hadn't heard my footsteps, or maybe he had, and this was his cue. He turned abruptly, and sunlight glinted off something small and lethal in his hand, a kitchen knife, twirled idly between his fingers like a fidget toy from hell. His lips twisted into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, all sharp edges and inherited entitlement. You're not the lady of the house here, chocolate drop. This is my turf. And I'll make damn sure you remember that. The blade scraped across the marble countertop with a screech that clawed at my nerves, etching a thin silver scar into the flawless surface. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird, the morning's fragile peace crumbling to dust beneath my feet. The knife hovered there, innocuous now but heavy with threat, and in his gaze, I saw not just the spoiled son resenting his father's choices, but a spark of something darker, a promise of collisions yet to come in this gilded cage we all shared. The city below churned on, oblivious, but up here, the first crack had spiderwebbed through our illusion, and I wondered how long before it shattered us all. A week had slipped by since the wedding at that sprawling country club in Connecticut, where champagne flowed like rivers of liquid gold, and guests in tuxedos and shimmering evening gowns murmured about the unexpected union, a powerhouse financier and a rising model whose paths had crossed at a Metropolitan Museum gala, amid the glow of chandeliers and whispered deals. The penthouse on the Upper East Side had become their shared nest, a gleaming eyrie perched above the city's ceaseless pulse, but beneath its polished veneer, irreconcilable currents churned like the undertow off Coney Island. I wandered the corridors, lined with abstract Picassos that Richard had snapped up at auctions, their jagged lines mocking my sense of displacement in this labyrinth of glass and steel. Every step echoed too loudly, a reminder that these walls weren't mine, not yet, and perhaps never would be. My room, with its sweeping view of Riverside Park, stood as my soul's sanctuary, where the Hudson's lazy curve offered a sliver of the world I knew, joggers at dawn, dog walkers under autumn leaves, far from the sterile opulence that swallowed everything else. There, I could spread out my sketches on the desk, charcoal smudges marking visions of curation, bold installations in Soho lofts, where art spoke truths that money couldn't buy. Becoming a curator wasn't just a dream, it was my anchor, a way to claim space beyond being someone's daughter, a label that clung like humidity after a summer storm. I'd pin up Polaroids from gallery crawls in Chelsea, each one a defiant scrap against the tide of this new life, whispering that I was more than the merger of fortunes downstairs. Dylan, by contrast, haunted the house like a specter unwilling to fade, the spoiled heir whose world had always bent to his whims, from private jets to skipped obligations. He'd blow off lectures at Columbia, trading dusty lecture halls for the haze of Lower East Side bars, where craft beer poured under the strum of buskers' guitars, their melodies raw against the brick walls scarred by graffiti. I caught glimpses of him in the mornings, slumped over coffee with a hangover's pallor, or late at night, shadows playing across his face as he paced the balcony, phone in hand, arguing with faceless friends about deals gone sour. He moved through the penthouse with proprietary slouch, claiming spaces as if my presence was an intrusion, a glitch in his scripted existence. Our clashes started small, petty barbs disguised as accidents, the kind that built like static before a lightning strike. He'd accidentally nudge my coffee across the kitchen island, watching the dark spill fan out like ink on marble, his apology a smirk that said he enjoyed the mess. I'd retaliate in kind, flipping on Afrobeat tracks in the living room when he lounged there, the driving rhythms of Fela Kuti filling the air, knowing how he'd grimace at the beats that echoed his new stepmother's world, a realm of soul food Sundays and Harlem block parties he dismissed as noise. Each incident layered resentment, turning the penthouse into a minefield where every glance held shrapnel, and I wondered how long before one of us detonated. One afternoon, trapped in the elevator descending for a family dinner at some midtown bistro, the tension coiled tighter than the cables humming around us. The mirrored walls threw back our reflections, me in a sundress that hugged my curves, curls framing a face set in guarded poise, him in rumpled chinos, blonde strands falling over eyes that burned with inherited disdain. You think your mom's some golden ticket to paradise? She's just a gold digger, and you're her bait, he hissed, voice low as the doors slid shut, sealing us in that silver box. The words landed like slaps, stirring the old defenses I'd built in Brooklyn playgrounds, where whispers followed you home. I lifted my chin, eyes flashing with the fire Mom had taught me to wield, a spark against shadows. And you're just a loser terrified Daddy'll cut off your allowance for your screw-ups. We're stuck here, yeah, but I won't let you poison my shot at something real. The elevator dinged at the lobby, doors parting to the doorman's polite nod and the rush of sidewalk traffic, but the air between us crackled, unresolved. That exchange lingered like exhaust fumes, tainting every shared meal, every accidental brush in the hallway, until avoidance became our unspoken pact, eyes averted, paths rerouted through the penthouse's endless loops. The pressure mounted like a storm brewing over Central Park, thunderheads gathering in the late afternoons, mirroring the unrest inside. I'd escaped to the park itself, pounding pavement along the reservoir, earbuds blasting Nina Simone to drown out the echo of Dylan's barbs, her voice a balm against the isolation creeping in. Back home, I'd journal in my room, pages filling with rants about privilege's blind spots, how his casual cruelty masked a fear of losing the throne he'd never earned. Mom noticed, of course, her intuition sharp as a stiletto, slipping me herbal teas and pep talks about blending with grace, but even she couldn't pierce the growing rift, her optimism a shield against the fractures she refused to see. Dylan withdrew further, his nights stretching into dawns at dive bars where neon signs buzzed like angry hornets, the kind of places where trust fund kids played at rebellion, slamming shots to forget the weight of expectations. I'd hear him stumble in, the private elevators chime a midnight intruder, followed by the clink of ice in a glass as he raided the bar cart. Once, passing his cracked door, I glimpsed him sprawled on the bed, guitar in lap, a Fender he'd inherited from some absent uncle, plucking discordant chords that spoke of bottled rage. It humanized him, just a flicker, before resentment surged back. Why should I pity the boy who wielded slurs like pocket knives? Our parents, oblivious or willfully blind, floated through it all in a bubble of newlywed bliss. Richard buried himself in spreadsheets, his study a fortress of glowing screens and leather-bound ledgers, emerging only for performative family moments. Mom, radiant in her role as consort, flitted to brunches in the village, her laughter a soundtrack to power lunches where she networked like a pro. They announced the Hamptons weekend over breakfast one crisp morning, frames of blueberry pancakes and fresh-pressed juice, a chance to bond as a family, Richard said, clapping Dylan on the back with forced joviality. I forced a smile, fork scraping porcelain, while inside, relief bloomed. This brief exile from the penthouse might cool the simmering feud. They departed Friday at noon, suitcases wheeled to the waiting black SUV, air kisses and waves from the lobby like a scene from a lifestyle blog. The penthouse exhaled, vast and echoing, its silence amplifying the city's distant roar, the honk of cabs on Park Avenue, the wail of a saxophone from a street performer blocks away. Alone, I dove into prep for my interview, poring over artist bios in the sun-drenched library, notes scribbled in margins of catalogs borrowed from the Strand. Ambition burned steady there, a counterpoint to the chaos, reminding me that this merger of lives didn't define me. I'd carve my path, connections or not. Saturday blurred into a frenzy, a cab to Chelsea, the gallery's white walls humming with possibility, curators in slim-fit jeans eyeing my portfolio with polite nods. "You've got talent," the lead one said, her voice measured over the clink of espresso cups in the back office, "but connections seal the deal in this town." The words stung like salt in a fresh cut, replaying on the subway ride home as graffiti-streaked tunnels whipped by. By evening, heels clicking against marble as I entered the empty penthouse, exhaustion warred with defiance. I'd network harder, charm deeper, prove them wrong. The foyer chandelier cast fractured light, shadows dancing like unspoken accusations. I aimed for the living room, craving a glass of red from the decanter, something to unwind the knots in my shoulders. The space sprawled before me, sectional sofas in neutral linen facing the floor-to-ceiling windows where Manhattan's lights began their nightly blaze, a constellation of ambition and anonymity. But I halted at the threshold, senses sharpening. The air hung thick with whiskey's bite and cigarette smoke, forbidden fruit in Richard's no-smoking decree. Dylan lounged on the couch, bathed in the TV's blue flicker, some thriller unspooling about vengeance in glass towers, heroes toppling empires from penthouse perches, irony thick as fog. He didn't look up at first, bottle dangling from lax fingers, ashtray improvised from a saucer on the side table. The screen's glow etched hollows under his eyes, making him seem older, wearier than his 20 years. "What, princess back from the ball? No Prince Charming in your precious galleries?" His voice rasped, laced with mockery that slithered under my skin, the nickname a barb honed from that elevator spat. Smoke curled from his lips, lazy spirals toward the ceiling, and I caught the faint tremor in his exhale, nerves masked as nonchalance. Adrenaline from the day's rejection surged, mingling with the old fury, propelling me forward a step, heels sinking into the plush rug. "Shut up, Dylan. You don't know a damn thing about my life." The words snapped out, sharper than intended, hanging in the haze like a challenge. He paused the film, remote clicking softly, and twisted toward me, legs unfolding as he rose, the couch sighing in relief. His frame filled the space, blonde hair tousled from raking fingers, shirt untucked and rumpled, carrying the bar's stale scent. We circled verbally at first, barbs flying like sparks from flint, me accusing him of wasting potential on hangovers and hang-ups, him retorting that my artsy dreams were just a fancy leash for mom's climb. Voices rose, echoing off the high ceilings, the city's hum a muffled audience below. Gestures sharpened, my hand slicing air to punctuate a point about entitlement, his leaning in to counter with tales of his real losses, the first wife who'd fled Richard's empire. Heat built, not just from words, but from proximity, the room shrinking around us. Then it crested, my arm flung wide in emphasis, his hand shooting out to catch my wrist, halting the motion mid-arc. Time stuttered. His grip was firm, calluses from guitar strings rough against my pulse, and in that anchor, electricity arced, not mere anger's flare, but something shadowed, magnetic, pulling like gravity's secret twin. Our breaths tangled, shallow and synced, bodies suspended inches apart, the TV's paused freeze frame mocking our stasis. The penthouse's vastness funneled to this pinpoint, his blue eyes darkening, mine widening in treacherous recognition, the skyline's lights blurring into irrelevance. The air thickened, heavy with the unsaid, whiskey's warmth and smoke's veil conspiring to blur edges. For a suspended breath, the world narrowed to heat radiating through fabric, the faint tremor in his hold mirroring my own, a forbidden current humming beneath the hate, whispering of unravelings we couldn't name. Hatred had birthed its shadow, a desire cloaked in disdain, threatening to swallow us whole if we let it breathe. We pulled back as if scorched, wrists releasing with a reluctance neither acknowledged, the distance snapping back like elastic. He sank to the couch, grabbing the remote to shatter the silence with resumed dialogue, assassins plotting on screen as if to echo our own veiled intents. I retreated to the kitchen, pouring wine with unsteady hands, the glass cold against lips that burned. The encounter lodged like a splinter, invisible but insistent, coloring every glance henceforth, the way his eyes lingered a beat too long at breakfast, or how my skin prickled at his footsteps in the hall. That night stretched long, sleep elusive as I replayed the moment in the dark, sheets twisted around limbs restless with confusion. What was it, that pull? Not affection, God no, just the twisted alchemy of proximity and resentment, turning foes into something perilously intimate. Dawn crept in with park birdsong filtering through vents, and I rose early, sketching furiously to exorcise the ghost, lines of fractured figures, merging and breaking, art as confession. But the sketchbook couldn't erase the truth. The penthouse held more than grudges now. It cradled a spark that could ignite or incinerate, and I feared which. Days blurred after, the parents' return injecting forced normalcy, barbecues on the terrace with catered ribs and Kraft Alesh, Richard grilling steaks while Mom played hostess, her sundress fluttering like optimism incarnate. Dylan and I performed civility, passing dishes with neutral smiles, but under the table, knees brushed accidentally, or not, and the charge lingered, unspoken electricity in a powder keg. I'd catch him watching from across the room, not with the old contempt, but a hooded intensity that made my stomach twist, equal parts dread and unwelcome curiosity. Exploration crept in subtly. Late one evening, unable to sleep, I padded to the library, seeking solace in art books under the desk lamp's pool of light. Footsteps drew me up, Dylan entering with a tumbler, pausing at the sight of me amid tomes. No words at first, just shared silence over Basquiat's crowns, his comment on the chaos in the paint breaking the ice into tentative ground. Didn't peg you for the type who gets the rage, he said, voice stripped of barbs, and I countered with questions about his guitar, the chords he'd murdered that night I overheard. It was a truce, fragile as rice paper, but in that exchange, layers peeled, his confessions of feeling erased by the wedding, my admissions of imposter syndrome in these halls. Yet trust was a luxury we couldn't afford. Mornings brought back the glares, petty sabotages resuming like habit. He'd leave my sketches askew on the table, a silent, know your place, and I'd blast playlists of protest songs when he napped nearby, rhythms infiltrating his dreams. The push-pull defined us, a dance on knife's edge, each step testing how far the new undercurrent could bend before snapping. Mom sensed the shift, her sidelong glances probing during tea times, but she chalked it to growing pains, her focus on charity events and Richard's arm candy duties. As autumn deepened, leaves turning Riverside Park to fire, the isolation amplified. I'd run longer trails, pushing lungs to burn out the confusion, returning slick with sweat to showers that scalded away imagined touches. Dylan dove deeper into nights out, stumbling home with stories slurred to empty rooms, but once, passing his door ajar, I heard him murmur into the phone, "It's not just her, it's everything falling apart." Vulnerability cracked his armor, and pity stirred, unbidden, softening the hate's sharpest edges. The weekend alone replayed in fragments, that grip on my wrist, the heat of nearness, a moment we'd both pretend erased. But pretense frayed. In the gym one morning, spotting him on the treadmill, our eyes locked through mirrors, and the air hummed anew, charged with what we'd unleashed. I turned away first, pedaling harder, heart racing from exertion or something baser, I couldn't say. The penthouse, once a cage, now pulsed with possibility's dark twin, and I navigated its halls warily, wondering if the storm we'd brewed would pass or pull us under. The second act crept in subtly, like Manhattan rousing under a veil of rain, gray skies heavy with promise, the streets below slick and humming with that hidden energy that turns downpours into symphonies of survival. Puddles mirrored the skyscrapers' jagged silhouettes, and the air carried the metallic tang of wet concrete, a scent that always pulled me back to Brooklyn's stoops where Mom and I had huddled under shared umbrellas. Up here, though, the penthouse insulated us from the deluge, its vast windows streaking with rivulets that blurred the world into impressionist smears. Avoidance became our daytime ritual, Dylan and I orbiting each other like wary planets in the solar system of polished floors and designer echoes, our paths crossing only in the kitchen for hurried coffees or the elevator's tense silences. Nights, however, transformed the penthouse into a shadowed arena, where moonlight sliced through blinds like searchlights on fugitives. I'd lie awake in my room, the Riverside Park view now a black void pricked by distant sodium lamps, listening to the city's nocturnal pulse, the muffled roar of late-night traffic on the West Side Highway, the occasional wail of an ambulance threading through the blocks. Sleep evaded me, chased away by the ghost of that wrist grab in the living room, its echo lingering like a bruise I couldn't see. Dylan prowled too, his footsteps a soft percussion in the halls, pausing outside doors as if debating intrusions, then retreating to his own lair where bass-heavy playlists leaked under the frame, a defiant soundtrack to his unrest. Richard had vanished into the maw of a corporate merger, his Wall Street office morphing into a second skin, complete with takeout tie at midnight and conference calls that droned through the penthouse speakers like corporate white noise. He'd emerge rumpled from his study, tie askew, planting distracted kisses on Mom's forehead before vanishing again into the dawn commute, his Mercedes swallowed by the FDR Drive's rush. The deal consumed him, endless projections of synergies and valuations, words that floated past me like financial fog, leaving the apartment colder, its grandeur amplifying the voids where family should have been. I pitied him sometimes, that relentless drive masking the cracks in his empire, but mostly it freed me to breathe, unscrutinized in the quiet hours. Mom, rechristened as the socialite queen in this new tableau, flitted through a whirlwind of Plaza Hotel galas, her evenings a blur of crystal flutes and designer gowns borrowed from stylists who'd once dressed starlets. She'd sweep in late, heels clicking like castanets, perfume trailing notes of jasmine and champagne, regaling us over brunch with tales of power couples and whispered introductions to gallery owners who'd love your eye, darling. Her transformation thrilled and unnerved me, the way she'd lean into Richard's arm at events, a picture of poised alliance, yet her texts to me buzzed with undercurrents, watch and learn, baby, this city's a game, and we're playing to win. Her absences stretched the days, turning the penthouse into a hollow shell where Dylan and I rattled like loose change. Loneliness gnawed at the walls, acidic and insistent, seeping through the seams of luxury like damp from a forgotten leak. Meals became solo affairs, me at the island with a salad from the deli on Madison, scrolling job listings for curation gigs that demanded pedigrees I lacked, him in the media room, microwave popcorn scattering kernels like confetti from aborted parties. The isolation bred introspection, hours lost to staring at the skyline's electric veins, wondering if this merger had traded one form of scarcity for another, Brooklyn's grit for Upper East Side's chill. I'd pace the terrace at dusk, wind whipping curls free, inhaling the river's briny whisper, grounding myself against the drift towards something undefined. I started noticing Dylan's gaze in those stolen daylight moments, no longer the blade of contempt but a veiled hunger, camouflaged behind smirks tossed like decoys during breakfast skirmishes. Across the table, as Richard droned about stock tickers, Dylan's eyes would snag on mine, lingering on the curve of my neck or the way light played over my collarbone, then flick away with a sarcastic quip about artsy types invading the real world. It unsettled me, that shift, like spotting a predator's glint in familiar underbrush, stirring a warmth I doused with reminders of his slurs, his spills, his entitlement etched in every slouch. Yet the pull persisted, insidious as fog rolling off the East River. I caught myself mirroring it, betrayals of focus in quiet corners, lingering on his hands during a rare shared elevator ride, knuckles scarred faintly from boxing sessions at that gym on Columbus Avenue, where he'd punch bags to exorcise whatever demons the merger had stirred. Those fingers, veined and sure, flexed against the rail, and I'd imagined their grip, not the angry snatch from before, but something exploratory, tracing paths I shouldn't map. Or in the living room, overhearing his phone calls to buddies from the old life, voice dropping to gravelly laughs, I'd fixate on the sharp line of his jaw, shadowed at day's end, clenching as he vented about Dad's midlife crisis trophy. It was fascination laced with fury, a dangerous curiosity blooming in the cracks of our Cold War. The turning point crashed in on a stormy night, lightning forking across the sky like veins of fury over the Brooklyn Bridge, illuminating suspension cables in stark white flashes that made the whole span tremble. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, fingers of a jealous lover clawing for entry, drumming a frantic rhythm that drowned the city's usual cacophony. Thunder rolled in from Jersey, deep and visceral, shaking the penthouse's bones, and I bolted upright in bed, sheets tangled around legs slick with sweat. Sleep had been a tease all evening, my mind looping the curator's rejection like a bad remix. You've got real talent, Aaliyah, but in this town. Connections closed the circle. The words mocked from the dark, amplifying doubts I'd buried under sketches and smiles. I couldn't stay cocooned, the storm called like an old friend, promising catharsis in its chaos. Slipping into a silk robe that whispered against skin still humming from the day's frustrations, I padded barefoot to the balcony doors, the marble cool underfoot like a grounding chill. Pushing them open released a gust of ozone-scented wind, heavy with the petrichor of soaked asphalt rising from streets far below and the faint, illusory brine of an ocean miles away. I leaned on the railing, robe billowing like a surrendered flag, letting rain mist kiss my face, eyes tracing the bridge's glow, a lifeline strung between burrows, much like the fragile threads holding our fractured family. He materialized from the gloom like a specter summoned by the thunder, Dylan stepping out from the shadows of the adjacent lounge, a bottle of bourbon swinging loosely from one hand, amber liquid sloshing in accusation. His shirt clung translucent to his chest, sodden from an impulsive dash through the downpour, perhaps from his room's terrace, seeking the same reckless solace. Water beaded on his lashes, darkening blonde strands to gold threads, and for a beat, he looked stripped, vulnerable under the storm's indifferent assault. "Can't sleep? Figured you'd be the type to burrow under covers at the first rumble," he said, voice cutting through the gale as he sidled closer, the words half tease, half invitation, his shoulder brushing mine in the narrow space. We stood there, shoulder to armored shoulder, the balcony's overhang shielding us just enough from the torrent, our breath sinking with the wind's howl. Below, the city endured, headlights smearing into comet tails on the FDR, a lone jogger's silhouette darting through Washington Square like a defiant shadow. Conversation unfurled unbidden, words tumbling like the rain, starting with the storm's fury, veering to gripes about the penthouse's creaks under thunder, then deepening into the raw underbelly, how the wedding had upended our orbits, flinging us into collision. I confessed the interview's sting over mimosas that morning, the curator's polite dismissal of velvet glove over rejection's fist. He admitted skipping another Columbia seminar, the lecture on economic theory blurring into irrelevance against his father's empire's shadow. His voice dropped to a whisper as lightning etched the horizon, bourbon bottle paused midway to lips. "Your mom's convinced she reeled in a keeper, some golden ticket fish, but Dad. He'll shatter when he clocks she's not cut from the same cloth as his exes, all pedigreed and predictable." Vulnerability cracked through, raw as the ozone bite, his profile taut against the flashes, eyes fixed on the bridge's span as if it held answers to the merger's fallout. It was the first unguarded glimpse, no sarcasm's armor, just a son's quiet dread of watching his world refract through her prism, vibrant, unyielding, utterly foreign. I turned toward him, rain or unshed tears glistening on lashes, the silk robe heavy now with mist. "And your dad's blind as a Wall Street bull if he misses how you're sinking in that hate you nurse for us, like it's oxygen keeping you afloat." The accusation hung, laced with empathy I hadn't planned, born from nights piecing together his silences, the way he'd stare at family photos on the mantel, his mother's ghost fading behind Mom's smile. Thunder punctuated it, a cosmic agreement, and in that suspended roar, our guards frayed further, anger at the theft of normalcy, hurt from the isolation it bred, mingling into a volatile brew that no longer repelled. Emotions detonated like fireworks arcing over the Hudson on the 4th, bursts of rage and raw ache igniting into an undeniable pull, the kind that warps physics and defies labels. The wind surged, shoving us closer, and our lips met in its frenzy, a collision born of storm and surrender, urgent and uncharted, bodies aligning in a fevered press that blurred boundaries under the relentless downpour. The thunder's boom echoed the thunder in my veins, a primal sync that stripped pretenses, revealing the hate as mere veil over this forbidden undercurrent, a weakness we'd both circled but never claimed. It wasn't conquest, it was confession, lips parting to truths words couldn't touch, the rain washing away the last veils of denial. We broke apart gasping, the balcony's chill seeping through wet fabric, but the charge lingered like static on skin, propelling us inside on unsteady legs. The penthouse swallowed us into its dim embrace, doors sealing out the gale with a soft click that felt final, irrevocable. Dripping trails across the foyer rug, we paused in the hallway's half-light, towels fetched in hurried silence, but the air hummed with aftershocks, eyes meeting in shadowed glances that spoke volumes. That night marked a pivot, no more feigned detours. Instead, we navigated the corridors like conspirators, whispers exchanged at bends, secrets spilled in the hush between thunderclaps, his fears of fading into Richard's blueprint, my dreams of galleries that celebrated voices like mine, unfiltered by fortune. The bond deepened in those stolen interstices, a clandestine weave threading through the penthouse's veins, a brush of fingers over coffee mugs left steaming on counters, coded notes slipped into sketchbooks with doodles of bridges and storms. Laughter crept in too, tentative at first, shared eye rolls over Richard's merger monologues, or Mom's gala selfies pinged to the family chat with exaggerated captions. It was intoxicating, this alchemy turning venom to velvet, but laced with peril. Every glance risked exposure, every near touch a gamble in the echoing expanse. I'd catch my reflection in mirrors, cheeks flushed not from runs but from the thrill of his proximity, wondering if this was liberation or a prettier cage. Morning arrived muted, the storm's remnants a drizzle pattering against panes, sunlight fracturing through clouds like hesitant apologies. I lingered in the bathroom, robe discarded for jeans and a tee, but the mirror betrayed me, a faint mark blooming on my neck, a rose from the night's tempest, hidden hastily under curls but not before Mom's eagle eye caught it during our ritual tea in the sunroom. She paused mid-sip, steam curling from her mug like question marks, her gaze sharpening on the shadow at my collar. A smile curved her lips, enigmatic as a Mona Lisa in Manhattan fog, knowing, amused, but zipped tight with maternal secrets. "Rough night with the weather, huh?" she murmured, arching a brow before flipping the page in her society rag, the moment dissolving into chatter about plaza afterparties. Her silence was a gift and a goad, that smile lingering in my periphery like a siren's call, urging discretion while hinting she'd long mapped these waters. I nodded, cheeks warming under the scrutiny, steering talk to her latest networking conquest, a collector who'd adored my portfolio picks, a potential door cracked ajar. But inside, unease stirred. Mom's intuition had always been a blade, honed on survival's whetstone, and this nonchalance felt too polished, too permissive. Did she suspect the shift, the way Dylan's sarcasm now laced with undercurrents, or was it projection, my guilt painting phantoms? The penthouse stirred to life around us, Richard's shower humming, Dylan's door creaking open down the hall, and I excused myself, heart a staccato against ribs, the mark a brand I both cherished and cursed. Exposure loomed like a patrol car's wail rising from the avenue below, distant but inexorable, threading through the morning's banalities, the doorman's buzzer for deliveries, the espresso machine's gurgle, Dylan's casual morning tossed over toast that landed heavier now, weighted with our shared nocturnal pact. We avoided solos that day, orbiting parents at brunch on the terrace where umbrellas shaded plates of smoked salmon and brioche, conversation a buffer against the undercurrent. Yet in the lulls, Richard buried in his tablet, Mom scrolling invites, our knees nudged under the glass table, a Morse code of reassurance, electric and fleeting. It anchored me amid the churn, this secret alliance, but shadows lengthened with each evasion, the risk of unraveling knotting tighter in my gut. Afternoons bled into explorations of this new terrain, tentative forays into vulnerability's map. I'd find him in the library post-lunch, sprawled with a dog-eared Kerouac, the road novel's wanderlust mirroring his caged restlessness, and I'd slide into the armchair opposite, legs tucked under, trading annotations on freedom's cost. Dad's mergers got him chained tighter than ever, he'd mutter, fingers drumming the spine, and I'd counter with tales of Mom's pre-Richard hustles, waitressing doubles to fund my art classes, her grit a blueprint I'd inherited. These exchanges peeled layers, revealing fissures, his guilt over first wife echoes in Mom's laugh, my resentment at being typecast as the exotic addition. It was therapy without the bill, cathartic in the stack's hush, but each revelation bound us closer, a rope that could save or strangle. Evenings amplified the intimacy's edge, parents' absences carving caverns of opportunity laced with hazard. One dusk, as rain's echo faded to humidity, Dylan cornered me in the wine cellar, technically a climate-controlled nook off the kitchen, reaching for a Merlot just as my hand extended, bottles clinking like toasts to folly. Laughter bubbled, unforced, dissolving into a lean against oak racks, his story of a botched bar fight spilling out with bourbon's warmth on his breath. I shared the sting of another rejection email, pixels mocking my solo exhibit pitch, and his hand grazed my arm in solidarity, brief, scorching, a hint of the balcony's fire without the blaze. We pulled back, glasses raised in mock salute, but the air thickened, pregnant with what simmered unsaid. Night's post-storm settled into a rhythm of guarded convergence, midnight snacks in the dim kitchen, where we'd perch on stools, trading playlists, my soul cuts blending with his indie rock, harmonies clashing then sinking in unexpected grace. Vulnerability flowed freer there, shadows softening judgments. He'd admit the boxing wasn't just release but ritual, pounding out the fear of irrelevance, fists wrapped tight as his tongue around apologies for early barbs. I'd confess the mark of doubt that interview had left, how connections felt like chains in a city that prized bloodlines over brushstrokes. These confessions wove us, thread by fragile thread, but dawn's light always brought retraction, daytime masks slipping back, avoidance a shield against the peril of permanence. Mom's enigmatic smile haunted these margins, popping up in sidelong glances during family dinners at steakhouses on Prime, where Richard's tales of merger milestones drowned the subtext. She'd serve me extra creamed spinach, whispering, "Fuel for dreamers," her eyes twinkling with that same knowing curve, as if she'd scripted our detours. It unnerved me, this maternal clairvoyance. Had she seen the balcony glow from her room, or sensed the shift in Dylan's barbs from venom to velvet? Questions bubbled unspoken, quelled by her distractions, invites to her next gala, where I'd charm the collectors, a ploy to launder our secrets in social whirl. Gratitude warred with suspicion, her silence bought time, but at what a accrual of interest. The penthouse, once a sterile expanse, now pulsed with our hidden cartography, corners marked by whispers, elevators charged with brushed elbows, the balcony a talisman of ignition. Dylan's gaze evolved further, hunger shedding sarcasm's husk in private, tracing me with an intensity that quickened breath, while my own betrayals multiplied, fixating on his post-boxing flush, the way sweat gleamed like city dew, or the gravel in his laugh during late calls, a timbre that echoed in dreams. It was addiction's prelude, this fascination, sweet and sabotaging, pulling me from sketches into reveries where hate's mask lay discarded, revealing contours I traced in the dark. Consequences gathered like thunderheads on the periphery, subtle harbingers, a misplaced phone buzzing with our coded texts during Richard's rare home evening, silence just in time, or the doorman's casual, "Mr. Dylan's been pacing the lobby again," relayed by Mom with arched brow. Each near miss spiked adrenaline, sharpening the thrill but fraying nerves, sleep fractured by visions of exposures, headlines screaming scandals in tabloids stacked by the co-op's entrance. Yet the bond held, deepening in defiance, a shared cigarette on the fire escape one fog-shrouded dawn, smoke curling like our secrets, his shoulder a steady press against mine as we watched ferries slice the harbor. Exposure's specter wove through daily fabrics, a siren song from the streets below, cop lights flashing on arrests blocks away, news alerts pinging about high society implosions, mergers gone toxic mirroring our own. I'd scroll them in bed, heart sinking to the warnings, while Dylan's snores filtered through vents, a reminder of the man who'd cracked my armor. Mom's smile persisted, a beacon or beacon's trap, her invitations now laced with probes. "You two getting along better?" The energies. Electric. I'd deflect with laughs, but doubt seated. Was her mystery approval or calculation, a mother's ploy to stabilize the nest? The question itched, unanswered, as autumn's chill seeped in, frosting windows with possibilities frost. In this charged limbo, art became my exorcism, sketches evolving from solitary figures to duets in stormlight, bridges linking fractured shores, hints of embraces veiled in abstraction. Dylan noticed, once snagging a page left on the scanner, his "not bad" for a Brooklyn import laced with genuine awe that warmed more than bourbon. It fueled me, this mutual erosion of walls, turning the penthouse from prison to palimpsest, layers of old hates overwritten by new intimacies. But as nights cooled, the loom of consequence tightened, threads pulling toward a knot we couldn't yet name, the storm's legacy a double-edged spark in the gathering dark. Passion ignited like a wildfire tearing through Prospect Park in high summer, dry tinder of resentment fueling flames that devoured every boundary we'd so carefully etched. What began as charged glances and whispered truces escalated into deliberate detours, pulling us into the penthouse's concealed crevices where the city's indifferent gaze couldn't pry. The library became our first haunt, its walls lined with Richard's tomes on mergers and markets, leather spines a fortress hiding our silhouettes from the corridor's unforgiving light. Afternoon sun slanted through the windows overlooking Central Park's autumn blaze, leaves aflame in reds and golds, joggers tracing paths like ants in a gilded maze, and we'd slip in after lunch, doors clicking shut with conspiratorial softness, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and unspoken dares. I'd arrive first sometimes, feigning interest in an art volume on Basquiat, fingers tracing crowns of jagged fury that mirrored the chaos blooming in my chest, heart a staccato against ribs at the sound of his approach. Dylan would enter with that predatory casualness, blonde hair catching the light like burnished wire, dropping into the armchair opposite with a book he never opened, his knee brushing mine in the narrow space between. Conversation would spark, barbs at first, testing waters, then softening into confessions. My latest sketch rejected by a Bushwick collective for lacking market appeal, his skipped therapy session where the shrink probed too deep into merger scars. Tension coiled, a spring wound tight by the day's slights, until words frayed, and proximity won, our forms converging in the alcove's shadow, breaths ragged against the hush, skins heat a fleeting rebellion that left us breathless, recalibrating in the afterglow's haze. Those encounters etched deeper grooves in our routine, each one a pivot born from emotional crests that left no room for retreat. After a blistering argument in the kitchen over inheritance whispers, Richard casually mentioning estate planners during breakfast, his offhand, fair shares for the kids, igniting Dylan's paranoia, he'd corner me by the fridge, voice a low growl accusing me of chasing daddy's wallet like your mom chased his ring. Fury surged, hot and familiar, my retort a slap of words about his freeloading facade, but the clash peaked in the pantry's dim confines, shelves of imported olives and artisanal cheeses pressing at our backs. Silence fell like a guillotine, and in its wake, our bodies sought solace in collision, a tangle of limbs and suppressed moans that dissolved the venom into something molten, dangerous, an intimacy that mocked the very lines we'd drawn, leaving echoes on my skin like invisible tattoos. My ambitions tangled with this madness, threads of Soho dreams weaving through the haze of stolen hours, transforming vulnerability into fuel. Curled against him in the library's window seat one twilight, park lanterns flickering to life below like fireflies in captivity, I'd murmur visions of my gallery, white walls in a cast-iron loft, spotlit canvases shouting stories of diaspora and defiance, visitors from Harlem to the High Line pausing to absorb the weight. His fingers would trace idle patterns on my arm, grounding the reverie, and he'd counter with his own escape plots, ditching Columbia's chains for a cross-country drive in a beat-up Mustang, gigs in dive bars from Austin to Seattle where his guitar could scream without boardroom echoes. These exchanges blurred the illicit with the aspirational, hate's residue fueling a shared delusion that we could burn it all down and rise from custom ashes, unburdened. The penthouse conspired with us, its vastness a accomplice in evasion. Dylan's bedroom, with its rumpled king bed overlooking the reservoir's dark shimmer, became sanctuary when parents vanished into Midtown's maw for power dinners at steakhouses on Media Row, where deals sealed over dry-aged ribeyes and Bordeaux flights. I'd slip in under cover of dusk, the doors latch a whisper against the symphony of distant horns, finding him shirtless and restless, veins standing out on forearms from shadowboxing the heavy bag in his corner. We'd collide from the threshold, tension from the day's micro-battles, his snide comment at brunch about my starving artist vibe, my eye roll at his latest hangover excuse, erupting into urgency, forms melding on sheets that smelled of his cologne and rebellion, the city's pulse a muffled heartbeat beyond the glass. Afterward, sated and spent, we'd lie staring at the ceiling's recessed stars, breath sinking in the quiet, where whispers turned dreams into blueprints, fragile as the skyline's fragile peace. Euphoria crested in waves, intoxicating as the champagne mom hoarded for galas, but it carried undercurrents of peril, each rendezvous a high-wire act over the abyss of discovery. In the wine cellar one humid evening, bottles humming in cooled rows like a subterranean choir, we'd argued over a pilfered Merlot, me decrying his entitled pours, him mocking my pretentious sips, until the peak snapped us into the shadows, backs against vintage racks, the faint clink of glass underscoring our hushed frenzy. Heat bloomed where words failed, a reminder that our loathing had liquefied into this volatile elixir, birthing risks we ignored in the moment, a dropped cork rolling underfoot like a die cast, or the elevator's distant chimes signaling an early return. We'd emerge flushed, composing ourselves with practiced nonchalance, but the danger lingered, a shadow trailing our steps like exhaust in the canyons below. As weeks blurred into a fever dream, the boundaries we torched left us exposed, navigating the penthouse with a hyper-awareness that sharpened every sense. Mornings brought the charade, family breakfasts where Richard pontificated on merger milestones over poached eggs and heirloom tomatoes, Mom's laughter a bright counterpoint, while Dylan and I exchanged loaded glances across the linen, knees grazing under the table in coded Morse. I'd feel his stare during these tableaux, not the old disdain but a possessive glint that quickened my pulse, stirring a cocktail of thrill and trepidation. How long before a lingering touch betrayed us, or a rumpled collar caught Mom's hawkish eye? Art sustained me through it, sketches in my room evolving into fevered diptychs. One panel rages inferno, the other intimacies glow, charcoal blurring edges like our own dissolving lines. Yet the madness seeped into solitude, haunting runs along the park's bridle path where fallen leaves crunched under Nikes, my mind replaying fragments, his grip's imprint on my hip, the way his breath hitched against my neck in the library's hush. Ambition twisted under the weight, applications to curatorial programs in Chelsea arrived with rejection's sting, emails citing fit that reeked of favoritism, pushing me deeper into his orbit for solace, where dreams of Soho lofts mingled with his tales of paternal leashes snapped in imagined road trips. It was symbiotic sabotage, our shared delirium a balm against the city's grind, but cracks formed, nights alone when guilt gnawed, visions of Mom's enigmatic smiles morphing into accusations, or Richard's offhand, family first, toasts landing like indictments. The shift to calculation slithered in unannounced, euphoria's high cresting into a plateau where recklessness whispered of permanence. One crisp evening, parents out for a Broadway premiere after-party, Mom in sequins, Richard in tails, their laughter echoing down the hall like a farewell, we converged in the living room, tension sparked by a overheard call, Dylan venting to a friend about Richard's will revisions, the lawyer's voice crackling through speakerphone about equitable divisions post-succession. Paranoia flared, his accusation that I was, in on the gold rush, met with my defense of Mom's hard-won glow, words escalating until the coffee table bore the brunt, a remote hurled aside in punctuation. Peak reached, we tumbled to the rug, forms entwining in the room's vast emptiness, Manhattan's lights winking through the panes like infernal stars mocking our mortal fray. In the dim after, sprawled amid throw pillows scattered like fallen soldiers, sweat cooling on skin as the city's neon bled into the carpet's weave, Dylan propped on an elbow, eyes fever bright in the half-light. His voice emerged rough, threaded with the night's residue. They're robbing us blind, Aaliyah, your mom and my dad, puppeteering us like extras in their sequel. What if? What if we cut the strings ourselves? Take what's ours before they rewrite the script. The words hung, a spark in dry grass, his gaze locking mine with a fervor that bypassed the haze, probing for alliance in the vulnerability we just bared. Echoes of his touch still thrummed through me, a tether pulling reason into the void, and I nodded, slow and irrevocable, the gesture sealing a pact born from passion's embers. We talked through the small hours, voices low as conspirators in a noir reel, the penthouse a cocoon against the dawn's creeping judgment. Richard's will unfolded in hypotheticals, clauses he'd boasted about over scotch, splitting the empire, trusts, properties from Tribeca lofts to Hampton spreads, stock portfolios ballooning like the skyline, equally between, the children, upon his and Mom's passing, a tidy bow on blended legacies. Dylan's bitterness colored it, years of being the sole heir, now diluted by our arrival, the merger not just corporate but personal, erasing his primacy. I countered with Mom's sacrifices, the modeling gigs that paid my tuition, her climb from Queen's tenements to this airy, yet conceded the theft, how their union scripted us as footnotes, ambition's collateral and their happily ever after. The yacht emerged as linchpin, that gleaming beast moored in the Hamptons, Richard's pride for, family escapes, all teak decks and sails snapping against Long Island Sound's breezes. Stage it clean, Dylan murmured, sketching air maps with a finger on my thigh, tracing routes from marina to open water where storms brewed seasonal. A tragic accident, parents tipsy on sunset cruises, a rogue wave or slipped railing sending them overboard, us, devastated survivors, washed back to shore by currents or crew. No foul play in the logs, just fate's cruel hand in affluent waters, inheritance funneling to us as the grieving heirs, untainted by suspicion in a city that devoured scandals but spat out the inconvenient. His conviction wove through the pitch, lips brushing my knuckles in a kiss that tasted of finality, sealing the blueprint with tenderness laced in treason. No one blinks twice, we're just the kids caught in the tragedy's wake, poorer for the loss but bonded in it. Optimism gleamed in his eyes, a rare unguarded fire, and I mirrored it, visions of freedom crystallizing, my Soho space-funded sand strings, his Mustang gassed for horizons unbound. The decision fused us, allies in this shadowed covenant, passion's heat forging a blade from our shared forge, deeper intimacy in the plotting's thrill, touches now laced with purpose, glances plotting next moves amid the mundane. Yet the pact sowed its own thorns, subtle barbs pricking the idol as days dawned on our secret. Phone notes proliferated, encrypted memos on yacht specs, tide charts bookmarked in incognito tabs, Dylan's device buzzing with alerts that made him snatch it from shared counters like contraband. I'd catch myself deleting drafts mid-text, casual queries to Marina's masked as vacation plans, heart lurching at the digital trail, a breadcrumb path to perdition if Richard's IT ghosts ever swept the network. Paranoia bloomed, tainting trysts. In his bedroom one stolen afternoon, forms arching in midday light filtering through blinds, a sudden siren wail from the avenue below froze us mid-breath, shadows of exposure dancing on walls like indictments. Mom's glances sharpened, too perceptive for comfort, her maternal radar pinging during terrace teas where chamomile steamed between us, park's bare branches clawing at winter skies. She'd tilt her head over porcelain rims, eyes narrowing on the flush I blamed on wind, or the way Dylan's laugh now carried undercurrents when he joined us, his arm draping casual over chair backs. "You two seem thicker than thieves lately," she'd quip, smile a crescent moon of ambiguity, probing without pressure, her silence a velvet trap that left me scripting deflections, just surviving the merger blues, Mom, while inside, suspicion coiled, wondering if her knowing arched from intuition or something scripted deeper. The alliance amplified risks in daily textures, turning the penthouse into a labyrinth of near misses, a forgotten scribble on a napkin, rough yacht diagrams sketched post-coitus, crumpled in haste when Richard's footsteps echoed premature from the elevator, or Dylan's bourbon-slurred murmur of the plan during a late-night raid on the bar cart, cut short by my elbow's nudge as Mom's door creaked across the hall. Each dodge spiked adrenaline, sharpening the bond's edge, passion now a prelude to plotting, our bodies' reunions laced with strategic whispers, dreams of escape whispered against skin like incantations. It was intoxicating, this elevation from lovers to outlaws, but the seeds took root, vulnerability's underbelly exposed. What if the accident looped us in, or guilt fractured the facade before the wave even rose? Winter's bite crept in, frosting the windows with fractal warnings, mirroring the plot's crystalline peril. I'd escaped to the park bundled in wool, boots crunching frost-kissed paths, mind-mapping contingencies, alibis layered like scarves, exit strategies for the aftermath's glare. Dylan mirrored the vigilance, his boxing sessions lengthening, fists pummeling shadows in the home gym until knuckles split, blood a stark reminder of the violence we'd court. Evenings brought huddles in the library, now less haven than war room, volumes on trusts and torts pulled from shelves for research, our heads bent over clauses that promised fortune but dangled nooses of liability. Mom's perceptiveness escalated the unease, her invitations to joint outings, brunch at St. Ambrius, where she networked us to art patrons, now laced with sidelong probes. Dylan's got that spark again. What's your secret, baby? I'd parry with laughs, crediting family therapy via forced proximity, but her eyes held oceans, depths I'd plumbed as a kid but now feared held currents pulling toward truths unspoken. Did she glimpse the fire we'd kindled, or sense the ash of resentment fueling darker flames? The question haunted, a specter in the plot's margins, amplifying isolation even in our twosome, trust absolute, yet shadowed by the what-ifs of her gaze. The pack's gravity warped time, weeks compressing into a taut spring, rejections from galleries now spurs to accelerate. Dylan skipped classes bartered for reconnaissance trips to the Hamptons Marina, feigned as scouting weekends. Intimacy evolved, touches now tactical, fingers interlacing over schematics, lips grazing in affirmation of contingencies, blurring the erotic with the existential, hate's ghost a faint echo in the blaze. Yet euphoria's embers cooled to calculation's steel, forging resolve amid the chill. We'd execute flawlessly, claim the spoils, and scatter to winds unyoked. But in quiet lulls, staring at the reservoir's iced surface from my window, doubt flickered. What price for this freedom, and who paid in full? Consequences loomed in granular threats, the penthouse a tinderbox of traces, a browser history wiped too late, Richard's offhand, estate audit over dinner sending forks clattering, or Mom's casual, yacht trip soon, family bonding, her tone light but eyes a scalpel, slicing through deflections. We'd regroup in hidden nooks, reaffirming with brushes of reassurance, the alliance a lifeline in the gathering storm. Ambitions anchored us, my Soho visions now funded in fevered sketches, his road dreams mapped with gas stops and gig lists, but the sin's weight pressed, turning passion's fire to forge's heat, allies bound in a chain we mistook for wings. As snow dusted the park's boughs, the plan solidified, a blade honed sharp, but the seeds of threat burrowed deep, waiting for spring's cruel bloom. The climax barreled toward us in the thick of summer, when New York exhaled heat like a furnace stoked too high, the Manhattan streets morphing into a molten river where concrete shimmered and air hung heavy with exhaust and sweat-soaked ambition. Asphalt softened under tires, mirages dancing at crosswalks, and even the Hudson seemed to steam under the relentless sun, its waters sluggish as if reluctant to flow. Up in the penthouse, the AC hummed a futile dirge against the invasion, windows fogging from the inside out, turning the skyline into a blurred watercolor of spires and haze. I'd taken to early mornings in the park, dew-kissed grass underfoot before the scorch set in, but even there, the air pressed close, a prelude to the pressure building in our veins, the plan's weight settling like humidity on skin. Family dinners had become minefields of forced levity, silverware clinking against plates like countdown ticks, but that night at our favorite steakhouse on Prime Row, the one with the oak-paneled booths and dry-aged cuts that cost more than a month's rent in Bushwick, Richard dropped the bomb over ribeyes sizzling in cast iron. His knife paused mid-slice, juice pooling crimson on porcelain, as he leaned back with that boardroom grin, tie loosened against the dim glow of pendant lights. Family cruise on the yacht, romantic weekend getaway for the new crew, he announced, voice booming with the satisfaction of a deal sealed, clinking his glass against Mom's in a toast that sloshed ruby red across linen. The words landed like buoys marking our course, the Hamptons beckoning with its promise of salt winds and whitecaps, but for Dylan and me, it was the siren call we'd scripted in whispers. Under the tablecloth's heavy drape, our eyes met in a flash of shared lightning, blue locking on brown, a silent morse of resolve amid the restaurant's murmur, fork scraping and laughter bubbling from adjacent tables like effervescent cover. My foot extended, deliberate, brushing his calf in a coated graze, the contact electric through linen slacks, a reassurance that thrummed up my leg like a pulse from the plan's heart. Mom beamed across the candlelight, her sundress a splash of hibiscus against the dark wood, oblivious or artfully so, while Richard rambled on about provisioning the boat with caviar and chilled rose, his enthusiasm a veil over the merger's fresh ink still drying on his desk. We nodded along, smiles pasted like decals, but inside, the machinery whirred, vials tucked in toiletry bags, weather apps checked for offshore squalls, every detail a cog in the inexorable turn toward execution. That night, back in the penthouse's cooled hush, the city's heatwave muffled to a distant growl through triple-paned glass, we retreated to my room, the door latching with a finality that echoed the elevator's chime earlier. Sheets still rumpled from the afternoon's stolen urgency, born of frayed nerves and the dinner's prelude, our bodies lay entwined in the afterglow's languid sprawl, skin slick and breath sinking like waves lapping a hull. Dylan's head rested on my shoulder, blonde strands damp against my collarbone, his fingers tracing lazy circuits on my hip as the ceiling fan stirred air heavy with our mingled scents. Fear coiled beneath the satiation, tomorrow's horizon looming like thunderheads on radar, and he broke the quiet first, voice a gravel whisper against my ear, "It'll be quick. Clean. Justice served on silver waves." The words hung, laced with the fervor of conviction, his exhale warm as conviction's forge. I nodded into the dark, curls shifting against the pillow, my hand gliding along the ridge of his spine, feeling the subtle tremor there, a echo of the adrenaline that had piqued us earlier, now channeled into this fatal choreography. Doubt flickered, unbidden, a shadow in the room's corners, not regret, exactly, but a premonition's chill, like spotting a riptide's subtle drag from shore. Mom's latest glance that evening, over tiramisu forks, had lingered too long on our clasped hands under the table. Had she sensed the shift, the way our alliance had hardened into this blade? Or was it projection, my guilt painting ghosts in the candle flicker? I pushed it down, fingers pressing firmer into his back, anchoring us both in the pack's momentum, the yacht's deck already mapping in my mind like a sketch half-drawn. Sleep came fitful, dreams fracturing into yacht rails slick with spray, parental laughter warping into gurgles under swells, jolting me awake to Dylan's steady breathing and the clock's red glow ticking toward dawn. We rose before the sun crested the reservoir, packing duffels with swimsuits masking the vials, small, innocuous glass cylinders of powdered sedative, procured from a discreet pharmacy contact in the village, their contents a promise of stupor without trace. The drive to the Hamptons blurred in Richard's SUV, windows down to gulp salt-laced air, Mom's playlist of Motown hits clashing with his classic rock detours, a soundtrack to the facade we wore like second skins. Billboards whipped by on the Long Island Expressway, ads for beach clubs and realtors mocking our impending severance, and I gripped the armrest, knuckles paling, Dylan's hand finding mine in the back seat's shadow, a squeeze that spoke volumes. We're in this swell together. The marina at dawn was a watercolor of serenity, slips lined with hulls bobbing gentle on Long Island Sound's glassy expanse, the water catching first light in shards of sapphire and gold. Seagulls wheeled overhead, cries sharp as warnings, while dockhands in faded polos coiled lines with practiced loops, the air thick with diesel and seaweed's brine. Our yacht loomed at the end pier, the Sea Legacy, Richard's 40-foot pride, teak decks gleaming under fresh varnish, sails furled like dormant wings against the mast. He bounded aboard first, linen shirt crisp and untucked, taking the helm with a proprietor's flourish, already spinning yarns of Wall Street conquests, closed a merger that'd make Moby Dick jealous, swallowed the competition whole. His laughter boomed over the lap of waves, a buoy in the morning mist, pulling us into the charade as crew untied and engines purred to life. Mom followed in a swirl of color, bikini top peeking from a sheer perio tied at the hip, her skin glowing from a pre-dawn spa glow-up, curls pinned with hibiscus clips that bobbed as she balanced a tray of mimosas, orange juice fizzing against champagne's bite. To new horizons, darlings, she trilled, distributing flutes with kisses on cheeks, her eyes sparkling like the sound's facets, oblivious to the vials burning holes in my pocket. Dylan and I boarded last, duffels stowed in cabins below where varnished wood-paneled walls scented of polish and promise, our steps measured on the gangway, hands dipping into pockets to finger the glass, cool, unyielding, a talisman of terminus. We settled in the cockpit's shade, visors pulled low against the climbing sun, exchanging glances over chilled glasses, the planned script unspooling in silent reels. Wait for the open water, the sunset squall forecast to brew. As the yacht cleaved from the marina, wake foaming white behind like a severed tail, tension threaded the air, invisible as the horizon's haze. Richard manned the wheel, charts spread on the console glowing with GPS pings, his anecdotes flowing unchecked, tales of hostile takeovers sealed on similar decks, deals that built empires from salt spray. Mom lounged on the cushioned bench, perio fluttering in the breeze, laughter peeling bright as she topped off mimosas, her free hand trailing in the blue, fingers skimming foam like a child's game. From our shadowed perch, their domestic tableau twisted into torment, every quip from Richard a barb of exclusion, every lean into Mom's shoulder a reminder of the throne we'd topple, their ease a mockery of the isolation they'd forged in us. My palms sweated around the vial, powder shifting like sand in an hourglass, heart sinking to the engine's thrum, each nautical mile a step from retreat. Hours unspooled under the relentless orb, the sound widening to an endless slate, dotted with buoys bobbing like forgotten sentinels and distant sails tacking lazy against the wind. We motored southeast, Richard plotting a loop toward Block Island 4, secluded anchorages, the radio crackling with weather updates, afternoon clouds building, fronts colliding offshore in a dance of barometric promise. Dylan and I played parts, him fetching ice from the galley, me snapping Polaroids of the wake for the gram, but our orbits tightened, knees brushing on the bench, whispers masked as sunscreen queries. Doubt gnawed deeper now, a current under the surface calm, flashes of Mom's pre-wedding counsel, her survive at all costs mantra echoing like a counterpoint, stirring unease that this justice might curdle to something sour. Yet resolve held, vials weight a gravity pulling us forward, the parents' chatter a white noise we'd soon silence. By midday, the heat peaked, deck planks warming underfoot like a griddle, forcing us below to the cabin's conditioned reprieve where fans whirred over leather settees. Richard napped in the master, snoring soft through the bulkhead, while Mom dozed topside under a wide-brimmed hat, novel splayed on her lap like a shield. Dylan and I huddled in the forward berth, door ajar to feign casualness, veal uncapped on the chart table, powder scooped into a spare flute space with trembling spoons, precise measures from online forums, enough for dreamless drift without overdoses tell. For the toast at sunset, he murmured, sealing the glass with bubbly slight, his eyes meeting mine in the porthole's circle, reflection fracturing our faces into mosaic resolve. Adrenaline sharpened every sense, salt on lips, diesel's faint undernote, the vial's residue gritty on fingertips, a sacrament of sorts, binding us in this irrevocable rite. Emerging topside, the sun hung high and merciless, casting long shadows across the deck where gulls trailed in our wake, scavenging crumbs from lunch's charcuterie spread. Tension ratcheted with each passing hour, the sound's expanse amplifying isolation, waves slapping hull like impatient fingers, horizon unbroken save for a freighter's smudge far east. Parents' interactions grated now, overtures of affection, Richard's arm around Mom's waist as she poured iced tea, her head on his shoulder during a lull in the breeze, reading as indictments, reminders of the normalcy we'd sacrificed to their union. Jokes about blended bliss landed like punches, our smiles strained masks, while under the bench, our hands clasped in shadowed grip, veal concealed in a cooler of melting ice, waiting for the golden hour's cue. Doubt's whisper grew, a tide lapping at certainty. Was this freedom's price too steep, or justice's forge? As afternoon waned, clouds gathered low on the western rim, anvil heads blooming purple against the azure, wind freshening to riffle the sound surface into choppy peaks. The yacht pitched gentle, sails unfurled now for auxiliary pull, Richard at the winches calling trims like a captain in command, his white shirt billowing like a banner of unassailable ease. Mom stirred from her nap, shaking out curls and mixing fresh mimosas in the cockpit's wet bar, flute stems catching light like diamonds on the brink. Sunset toast to us, the unbreakable foursome, she declared, voice lilting over the slap of halyards, distributing glasses with flourishes that masked the tremor in my hand as I accepted mine, the doped one passed to Dylan for slight to Richard, then to her in the shuffle. We clinked, crystal chiming clear as a bell toll, the first sip swallowed against the yacht's roll, effervescence masking the bitter undercurrent. Conversation ebbed into languid drifts, the sedative weaving its subtle web, Richard's tales trailing off mid-anecdote, eyes glazing as he slumped against the combing, glass tipping forgotten in lax fingers, Mom's laughter softening to yawns, Perio slipping as she curled on the bench, novel tumbling to the deck with a thud muffled by cushions. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of tangerine and indigo, waves cresting higher now as the squall's vanguard nipped at our heels, wind whipping spray across the rails. Dylan rose, vial empty in his pocket like a spent shell, circling to my side where I perched rigid, heart hammering a war drum against the dusk. His arms snaked around my waist, palm flat and anchoring on the curve of my hip, breath hot against my temple. Soon, Aaliyah, freedom's wake breaking for us. The words vibrated through me, a lifeline in the gathering gale, but the vial's ghost lingered on my tongue, acrid as hindsight. Dusk deepened, the yacht laboring into the building sea, deck tilting under swells that foamed green and white, thunder grumbling distant like a beast rousing. Parents lolled insensible now, breaths deep and even, limbs akimbo in the cockpit's nest, Richard's head lolled back against cushions, Mom's form curled fetal under the throw, Perio tangled like a shroud. Wind howled through rigging, sails luffing in gusts, and we moved as one, Dylan's hand engulfing mine, pulling me to the rail where shadows pooled thick. The push came swift, coordinated, my nudge to Richard's shoulder, rolling him toward the gunwale with a grunt swallowed by the gale, Dylan's lift under Mom's arms, her body limp as driftwood sliding over the teak with a scrape that clawed my nerves. Plumes erupted as they hit the water, dark figures vanishing into the troughs, the splash of punctuation lost to the storm's roar, gulls shrieking overhead like accusatory witnesses. Reality crashed then, a rogue wave slamming the hull broadside, deck awash in foam that stung like revelation. Blood welled sudden on my palm, a gash from the rail's edge in the scramble, crimson blooming against salt-slick skin, dripping to mingle with the deck's runoff in rivulets that traced toward scuppers. We staggered back, arms enfolding in the cockpit's lee, bodies pressed in a vice of horror and hollow triumph, breaths ragged over the waves' thunder. Tears carved tracks down my cheeks, salt mingling with spray, while Dylan's grip tightened, jaw clenched against sobs he wouldn't voice, the sound swallowing our architects whole. Gulls wheeled tighter, cries piercing the wind like dirges, and in that suspended vertigo, the axe finality settled, a stone in the gut, justice? Or just a void echoing our making? Sirens pierced the horizon before the echo faded, Coast Guard cutters slicing the dusk like blades, light strobing red and blue against the squall's bruise-purple underbelly. Dylan's radio call, frantic, scripted tears choking the mayday, crackled acknowledgments, positions relayed in bursts as the yacht yawed in the chop. We stood braced at the helm, arms locked around each other, the bloodied rail a silent testament smeared in haste with a rag from the locker. Adrenaline surged anew, a feral spark igniting in the peril's crush. His lips found mine in the wheelhouse's gloom, desperate and devouring, a clash of salt and sorrow, promises gasped between breaths. We'll run, rebuild, you and me, the kiss a last flare before the floodlights bathed us, sealing the moment in stark relief. Rescue vessels closed fast, hulls cutting wakes that rocked us harder, crews in orange vests shouting over bullhorns as grapples hooked the rail, boarding parties swarming the deck in efficient chaos. Flashlights swept the cockpit, illuminating the abandoned glasses tipped in cradles, cushions askew like disheveled witnesses, the vial's residue a faint crust on the bar's edge we'd overlooked in frenzy. Paramedics checked us over, pulse racing, minor lacerations bandaged, shock's pallor noted in logs, while divers plunged into the blackening swells, beams cutting futile swaths for bodies the tide claimed swift. Questions barraged in the cutter's cabin, salt-crusted and humming with radios. What happened? Storm hit sudden. Our story spilled rehearsed, sunset toast, yawns from the heat, a lurching rogue wave pitching them overboard before we could react, voices cracking on cue, hands clasped white-knuckled across the formica table. Exposure's breath ghosted our necks even then, forensic techs bagging the flute shards, fingerprint dust ghosting surfaces we'd touched 1,000 times in innocence. Dylan's arm around my shoulders for the cameras, grieving siblings, survivors forged in loss, felt leaden now, the kisses' aftertaste bitter as the coffee pressed into chilled hands. But the real fracture came in memory stutter, Mom's eyes, in that final slide, fluttering not in stupor but awareness, a glint sharp as her old Brooklyn stare, locking mine across the rail's shadow before the plunge. Not drugged haze, but calculation's cold gleam, had she known, played possum to the end? The thought burrowed, a splinter under the bandage, as helicopters thwopped overhead, news choppers circling the flotilla like vultures scenting headlines. Back on land by midnight, the Hamptons Marina a blaze of floodlights and yellow tape, statements transcribed in sterile station room scented of stale donuts and brine-soaked gear. Reporters clustered at the chain link, flashes popping like erratic gunfire, questions hurled through the scrum, any foul play? Heirs to the fortune? Our nose drowned in the din as handlers herded us to a waiting car, Richard's lawyer already en route from the city, briefcases bulging with contingencies. Dylan and I rode in silence, windows fogged against prying eyes, his hands seeking mine in the dark, but I pulled away, the blood's crust flaking under nails a reminder of the rail's bite, and hers. Doubt swelled to nausea, the premonition cresting. What if the plan had always been hers, our strings pulled by the puppeteer we'd sought to dethrone? The drive back to Manhattan stretched eternal, highway lights streaking like accusations, radio tuned low to news loops confirming tragic yacht mishap claims financier and wife, our names dropped as devastated step-siblings. Grief's mask held through the tolls, tears genuine now in the alloy of loss and lie, but Mom's gaze replayed in loops, that osmotically aware flicker unraveling the script. Dylan's murmurs of, "It'll be okay, we're free," meant to soothe, grated, his optimism a blindfold-eyed shed, the vial's powder now a phantom itch on skin. Dawn broke gray over the skyline as we docked the SUV curbside, penthouse lights winking vacant above, a hollow beacon to the empire we'd inherited, but victory soured in my throat, the triumph's afterglow eclipsed by that final, knowing look. Settling into the empty airy felt profane, echoes amplifying the absence, Richard's study door ajar to silent screens, Mom's vanity strewn with half-used perfumes, their scents a haunting perfume in the AC's chill. We collapsed in my room, bodies curling instinctive despite the rift, his arm draping heavy as exhaustion claimed us, but sleep evaded, my mind churning wakes of what-ifs, divers finding traces, logs subpoenaed, her eyes testifying from the deep. Adrenaline's embers kindled one last spark, a brush of lips in the half-light, desperate anchor against the unraveling, but it fizzled to ash, promises unspoken as sirens wailed distant, the city's pulse indifferent to our fracture. Exposure wasn't just coming, it was already here, in the blood under my nails and the gaze that wouldn't fade. Morning brought the deluge, lawyers in the foyer, suits crisp as edicts, outlining probate's machinery, the will's clauses snapping into place, assets frozen pending inquiry, but the bulk funneling to surviving issue once cleared. Dylan's relief shone in tight smiles over coffee, visions of Mustangs and open roads bubbling anew, but I sipped mine black and bitter, Mom's glint a wedge driving between us. Calls flooded, condolences from Richard's board, mom's agent sniffing for scandal spin, reporters' voicemails a chorus of intrusion. We fielded them tag team, voices modulated to raw-edged sorrow, but in lulls, his hands sought mine, met with evasion, the pack's bloom wilting under scrutiny's sun. Investigators arrived by noon, badges glinting under the chandelier, notebooks flipping to questions that probed like hooks, timelines cross-checked, weather logs pulled, the vials procurement a shadow they circled without naming. Samples swabbed from the bar, powder residue flagging as sedative, not champagne dregs, sent chills racing my spine, but our denials held water, must have been from the mimosa's fizz, or sea air playing tricks. Dylan's poise cracked least, eyes downcast in feigned grief, but I caught his flicker toward me, alliance fraying in the room's sterile light. Mom's absence loomed largest in their queries. Any strains? Odd behaviors? Prompting shrugs that masked the truth's undercurrent, her knowing gaze a secret tide pulling me under alone. Afternoon dragged into interrogative marathons, the penthouse a stage for reenactments, lawyers scripting our narrative, PR firms drafting pressers to paint us as tragic unifiers. Dylan paced the terrace, phone glued to ear with estate whispers, excitement bleeding through the grief, stocks vesting, properties deeding, our futures gilded in proxy. I retreated to my room, sketches abandoned on the desk, curling on the bed where last night's tremor lingered, fingers tracing the rail's phantom gash. Doubt metastasized. That look, was it accusation, or absolution? Complicity in her final act, or a warning unheeded? Tears came hot then, silent against the pillow, mourning not just them but the illusion we'd chased, passion's fire banked to embers of isolation. Evening fell with warrants whispering through vents, forensic teams combing the yacht trailered back to dry dock, fibers, and prints catalogued like sins. Dylan's knock came soft, door creaking to his silhouette, concern etching lines I'd once traced in hunger. We did it, for us, he urged, sinking beside me, hand hovering before retreat at my flinch. Words tumbled, escape routes refined, Soho lofts scouted in haste, but they rang hollow, the vials grit still under nails despite scrubs. I nodded through the blur, alliance a frayed rope, but inside, the premonition solidified, freedom's cost exacted not in waves, but in the gaze that saw through storms, leaving me adrift in its wake. Night deepened, city lights mocking from the windows, a constellation of judgments unblinking. Sleep claimed Dylan on the guest chair, breaths even in repose, but I vigiled, replaying the plunge, splash fading to silence, blood's bloom antique, her eyes, clear, conveying volumes in the gale. Razobladeny breathed hot now, not just in evidence lockers but in memory's vault, the plan's architect perhaps its saboteur from the deep. Dawn's promise loomed gray, inquiry sharpening to scalpels, but in the quiet, resolve shifted, not to flight, but fracture, the triumph's shell cracking under truth's inexorable swell. The finale didn't crash on the yacht's deck amid salt spray and thunder, but unfolded in the stark fluorescence of a Hamptons police station on the outskirts, where the tang of ocean brine clashed with the bitter drip of vending machine coffee and the acrid undernote of stressed officers' sweat-soaked uniforms. The building squatted low and unassuming off Montauk Highway, its cinderblock walls scarred by years of summer scandals, fluorescent bulbs buzzing like trapped hornets overhead. I'd been shuttled there in the back of a cruiser after the Coast Guard's floodlit extraction, the vinyl seat sticking to my skin through the thin sundress, wrists already chafing from the cuffs clicked on at the marina's edge. Outside, waves crashed audible through cracked windows, a mocking rhythm to the chaos we'd unleashed, while inside, the air hung thick with the residue of stale interrogations, cigarette ghosts from a bygone ban, overlaid with the fresh ink of clipboards and the metallic click of handcuff keys. Dylan was taken first, his arm twisted behind by a burly detective with a jaw like a lobster trap, the metallic jangle echoing down the linoleum hall as they frog-marched him to a side room. I'd caught his glance over the shoulder, wide-eyed, pleading, the blue depths churning with betrayal's first inkling, as the door slammed, muffling his protests into incoherence. The station's bullpen hummed around me, phones trilling with updates from divers still scouring the sound, radios crackling coordinates for drag nets that wouldn't yield what we knew was gone. Officers milled, coffee mugs steaming in meaty fists, their glances sliding over me like oil on water, the grieving stepdaughter, shell-shocked and sun-freckled, but inside, my pulse steadied to a metronome of calculation, the plan's pivot scripted in the marrow from the moment Mom's eyes had gleamed too clear. They led me to the interrogation room next, a box of scuffed table and folding chairs under a one-way mirror that reflected my disheveled curls and the faint bloodstain on my hem from the rail's bite, now crusted like an accusation. Cuffs ratcheted to the table's eyelet with a finality that grounded me, steel-biting wrists a counterpoint to the adrenaline's fade, but my eyes stayed dry, lashes unblinking against the harsh light that leached color from the walls. Two detectives slid in opposite, hardened locals with salt and pepper stubble and ties loosened against the heat, notebooks flipping open like judgments, pens poised over lined pages yellowed at the edges. "Walk us through it again, Miss Aaliyah," from the toast to the splash, the senior one drawled, voice gravel from too many Marlboros, his partner nodding with the rote empathy of routine tragedies. The words flowed smooth as rehearsed monologues, my voice steady, laced with the tremor of feigned trauma that quavered just enough to sell the fear. I laid it out, Dylan's obsession festering since the wedding, his whispers turning venomous in the penthouse shadows, plotting that accident over late-night bourbons while I tried to talk sense. How he'd cornered me in the cabin that afternoon, veil pressed cold to my palm with threats veiled as love, do it for us, or watch everything burn, his jealousy a toxin twisting the merger into personal apocalypse, the new family a theft of his birthright. Lies wove seamless, the powder his idea, sourced from some shady contact in the East Village, my reluctance a chain he'd forged with manipulations, nights where his hands turned possessive, words coiling like smoke to bind me. Emotions crested in the telling, voice cracking on, I just wanted peace, but calculation anchored me, eyes locking theirs with the wide innocence of survival. I was terrified for Mom, I lied, the phrase dropping like a well-placed hook, baited with the maternal bond they'd clock as unbreakable, my lower lip caught in teeth for the cameras whirring discreet in the corner. The senior detective leaned back, chair creaking under bulk, exchanging a nod with his partner that sealed the narrative, victim's daughter, coerced into complicity, her tears a currency of credibility. Pen scratched furious, details cross-referenced to yacht logs and our initial statements, the air thickening with the scent of their approval, coffee breath mingling as they murmured, cooperating witness, into recorders. Outside the door, Dylan's voice rose muffled, denials fracturing under evidence's hammer, yacht cams capturing his slight at the bar, grainy but damning, the vials prints a lattice of his alone, no trace of mine wiped clean in the post-plunge frenzy. His world crumbled audible, a roar cut short by the slam of holding cell bars, the station's pulse quickening to the rhythm of cuffs and charges. Hours blurred in that room, the mirror's reflection a study in detachment, my face pale but composed, curls frizzing in the humidity seeping from the sound, the cuffs a prop in the theater I'd directed from the wings. Detectives cycled in with updates, divers pulling nothing but kelp and buoys, toxicology pending on recovered samples that would flag the sedative but finger him alone, his phone's deleted texts resurrected by techs in Albany like digital Lazarus. Empathy flickered in their eyes now, the junior one sliding a water bottle across the table, condensation beating like unshed tears. You're safe now, kid, guy like that's got demons deeper than that water. Gratitude welled performative, a nod and murmured thanks, but inside, resolve hardened to diamond, the inheritance's machinery grinding in the background, Richards will unfurling clauses like a victory scroll, assets vesting to the sole surviving heir, with my name etched in legalese gold. Dawn crept gray through barred slits, the station stirring to shift change, officers clocking out with yawns and styrofoam cups, the ocean's roar softening to a hush as gulls wheeled toward the bay. They uncuffed me at last, wrists blooming red welts like badges of passage, a female sergeant murmuring, protective custody till arraignment, as she led me to a holding lounge with sagging couches and vending hum. News flickered on a mounted TV, volume low but lethal, CNN's ticker scrolling, stepbrother charged in financier's yacht murder, stepsister testifies to coercion, Dylan's mugshot flashing grainy from the yacht's extraction, eyes hollowed by flashbulbs. In the adjacent bullpen, visible through a half-glass partition, he paced his cell's confines, orange jumpsuit a garish shroud, freezing at the screen's glow, recognition dawning slow, then shattering in a bellow that rattled the bars, fists slamming steel in futile rage. His gaze found mine through the partition's haze, raw with the wound I'd inflicted, betrayal's blade twisting deeper than any wave, the alliance we'd forged in penthouse shadows now a noose of my making. I held it, unblinking, the dry eyes a fortress against the storm in his, whispers of us against them, curdling to accusations mouthed silent. You bitch, how? Guards hauled him back, door clanging like a period, but the echo lingered, a counterpoint to the TV's drone of pundits dissecting the Hamptons air horror, speculating on motives rooted in resentment's toxic brew. Empathy's ghost stirred fleeting, memories of balcony confessions, his vulnerability cracked open like a geode, but calculation smothered it, the will's provisions a bomb, millions in trusts unlocking phased, stocks vesting immediate, the Tribeca Pi de Terra deeding clean, all funneled to me as the unimpeachable survivor. Dylan's share evaporated in the charge sheet's fine print. Release came mid-morning, the station's front doors parting to a scrum of reporters bottled by sawhorses, flashes popping like erratic fireworks against the salt-glazed parking lot. Lawyers swarmed, Richard's firm, suits starched and briefcases bulging with injunctions, herding me into a black Escalade, tinted windows sealing out the frenzy as tires crunched gravel toward the expressway. The drive blurred eastward first, to a safe house in East Hampton, a shingled cottage tucked behind dunes, waves visible through salt-streaked panes, where I paced floorboards creaking under wicker rugs, phone silence to voicemails from distant aunts and moms agents spinning tragic loss narratives. Solitude amplified the fracture, Dylan's face on the news loop haunting the laptop screen, arraignment set for Monday in Riverhead, bail a pipe dream under murder's weight. Guilt's whisper tested the walls. Had I pushed too far, or just far enough? But ambition's echo drowned it, visions of Soho lofts materializing in the dune grasses sway. Weeks compressed in that exile, the cottage a cocoon of coastal isolation, mornings with black coffee on the widow's walk, sound stretching endless blue, gulls' cries a dirge for the plunged, afternoons fielding calls from probate clerks, assets liquidating in cascades, offshore accounts wiring clean, Hampton's estate appraising at 8 figures. The penthouse's keys forwarded like a poison chalice. News cycles churned, Dylan's pleas of innocence fracturing under leaks, yacht cams looped on Dateline specials, his prints a forensic tattoo, while I emerged the phoenix, coerced survivor, interviews softballed by sympathetic anchors, tears coaxed for the lens but rationed in private. Empathy for him ebbed to pity's rind, letters smuggled via his counsel, scrawled frantic on legal pads. We were in it together. Don't let them bury me alone. Tossed unopened into the hearth's embers, their glow a fleeting warmth against the chill of severance. Return to the city sliced sharp in early fall, the Escalade threading the Midtown tunnel's green glow, skyline rising like a judgment reclaimed. The penthouse greeted vacant, echoes hollowing the halls where whispers once wove us, Richard's study stripped to echoes, Mom's closet a cavern of hangers swaying like ghosts. I lingered brief, packing sketches into crates for forwarding, the balcony railing a talisman touched once, metal cool under palms, wind carrying faint brine of that night, before fleeing to the first spoils, a Soho loft in a cast-iron beauty on Prince Street, raw beams and exposed brick a canvas for rebirth, keys turned with the click of unlocked futures. Movers hauled in under autumn's sun slanting gold through warehouse windows, boxes thumping like heartbeats, the space unfolding potential, white walls for my gallery dreams, Hudson views traded for street-level pulse of galleries and grit. Settlement papers arrived mid-move, couriered in sealed envelopes thick as Bibles, Richard's empire distilled to ledgers, millions parked in trusts dispersing quarterly, stocks ballooning on merger news, the will's codicil a masterstroke. To my surviving daughter, Aaliyah, in full and unencumbered, Dylan's erasure etched in legalese, his trial's shadow no bar to the flow. Elation crested brief, a sip of vintage from the penthouse cellars uncorked in the loft's bare kitchen, but solitude's weight pressed, nights on air mattresses staring at pressed-in ceilings, city hum filtering through fire escapes like accusations. Dylan's face flickered on subway ads, bail denied, psych eval pending, his resentment motive dissected in tabloids stacked by bodegas, a villain scripted from our shared script. Pity resurfaced in waves, unbidden during runs along the High Line, railings evoking the yacht's fatal edge, but calculation quelled it. He'd been the spark, I'd fanned the blaze, survival's calculus unforgiving. Truth's letter arrived unannounced on a drizzly Thursday, slipped under the loft's industrial door by a nondescript courier vanishing into the Mercer Street throng, envelope plain cream with my name in Mom's looping script, familiar as childhood valentines from her modeling gigs. I slid it slow over takeout foes steaming on the butcher block island, steam curling like question marks, the paper unfolding to her words in blue ink steady as ever. Darling, you've always been my sharpest edge. Richard was the ladder, Dylan the snag, pulled too tight, liable to snap. The sedative? Sugar dust from a patisserie prop, divers waiting in the troughs to haul us clear. Now it's ours clean, accounts rerouted, deeds in your name via proxies. Fly to Europe, Paris lights suit you. Mama's proud, we've won the long game. Revelation hit like espresso's jolt, paper trembling in fingers, the drizzle outside pattering Morse on window panes. Complicity's blueprint, her gaze on the yacht no accident but cue, our passion a pawn in her chess. The loft's vastness contracted then, brick walls closing like a vice, the envelope's weight a anchor dragging memory's depths, balcony nights scripted from afar, her knowing smiles directives veiled in maternal mist. Rage bubbled hot, scalding the foe's broth untouched, betrayal's double helix, Dylan the fall guy in her grander gambit, his cell a sacrifice to clear our board. Yet admiration threaded the fury, her survival's elegance, faking the plunge with underwater shadows, emerging phoenix-like to orchestrate from the wings, accounts siphoned pre-storm via offshore shells I'd never traced. Emotions warred in the steam's haze, grief for the boy I'd loved in shadows, resentment at the strings I'd danced unwitting, but calculation prevailed, the letter folded crisp into a drawer with the will's copies, a relic of the real architect unveiled. Afternoon waned to decision's edge, Soho streets slick with rain sheeting gutters, pedestrians huddling under awnings as I dashed to a travel agent on Spring, the bell tinkling like a farewell chime. Tickets printed swift, non-stop to Paris Orly, first class on the morrow, euros crisp in a wallet fat with first disbursements, visions of Montmartre ateliers blurring with the agent's chatter on jet-lag cures. Back in the loft, packing distilled to essentials, sketches rolled tight, a single vial replica as memento, Mom's letter tucked in a false bottom case, the space already echoing hollow, its promise tainted by the cage it gilded. Night fell early, city lights fracturing through rivulets on glass, Manhattan's glow a gilded bars from the high-rise perch, ambition's skyline now a labyrinth I'd escaped only to inherit. Dawn broke crisp, cab idling curbside with exhaust pluming like departing breaths, the loft's door locked final behind me, keys forwarded to a broker sending flip potential. JFK's sprawl swallowed me whole, check-in lines snaking under fluorescent halos, security wands beeping indifference, boarding pass a talisman clutched through the lounge's plush hush, champagne flutes clinking toasts to transients. The flight lifted smooth, engines thrumming ascent over the sound's silver thread, Hamptons shrinking to specks where cutters still patrolled phantom wakes. Dylan festered in Riker's gray, news feeds I'd silenced pinging updates, plea denied, trial looms, his face gaunt in court sketches, the fall's full weight crushing the spark I'd known. Mom tallied in Brooklyn's stoop-shadowed flat, old tenement a vault for her cut, her proud, a hollow echo in the letter's crease, partners in plunder, but orphans of trust. Paris unfolded in descent, Eiffel iron lacing the horizon like a promise unbarred, Seine's curve a ribbon unbound by tides of deceit. The loft there waited, sublet sight unseen in the marais, garret windows framing cobblestones where artists once starved for truth. Yet settling brought the aftertaste, unpacking yielded the letter anew, words blurring under tears rationed for privacy, the betrayal's chill seeping like autumn gusts off the Hudson, carried across oceans. Dylan's ghost lingered in dreams, cuffed hands reaching through bars, blue eyes accusing the complicity I'd worn like skin, while Mom's silhouette danced elusive, her win a Pyrrhic crown heavy with isolation. Ambition reignited in the garret's light, sketches unfurling on easels borrowed from neighbors, gallery queries fired to left bank collectives, but the fire burned cooler, tempered by the cost, passion's pond, alliance's ash. Months layered like patina on the Seine's bridges, Paris weaving its spell, cafes humming with philosophers' debates, Louvre halls echoing my curation pitches accepted tentative, a small show on Exile's palette greenlit for spring. News from home trickled via apps muted low, Dylan's conviction sealed in Riverhead's vaulted courtroom, life without parole a sentence etched in headlines, appeals dwindling like embers. Mom's trail vanished post-letter, Brooklyn flat vacated, whispers of Caribbean relocations in society rags, her cut laundered through shells I'd inherited intact. Letters to neither sent, voids filled with pigment and canvas, but nights on the garret's balcony brought the wind's bite, Hudson's ghost in the champ's breeze, questioning the victor's spoils, who the true casualty in that skyline scrum, where scraps of heaven came bloodied and barbed. The aftertaste endured, a bitterness lingering like oversteeped the provoking midnight journal scrawled in bilingual fury. Was I survivor or spider, Mom's blade or Dylan's noose? Gallery openings blurred into accolades, collectors cooing over diptychs of fractured bridges, yacht rails and Brooklyn spans merged in charcoal storms. But success soured subtle, the loft's rents paid from trusts that whispered of the plunge. Europe stretched inviting, trains to Florence's marbles, Berlin's raw walls mirroring my own, but anchors tugged oceanic, the city's fight for sky a universal grind where victims wore victors' masks. In quiet vigils at the Pont de Arts, locks clicking padlocks of lovers' vows, I'd trace the Seine's flow, wondering if the current carried redemption or just the next swell, freedom's illusion, or justice's jest in a world where every grasp clawed deeper voids. Winter dusted the marais in frost, garret fires crackling against the chill, my show a modest triumph, walls hung with exiles' cries, critics nodding at the raw intimacy of loss, sales trickling enough for expansions. Yet solitude's companion was the riddle, Mom's orchestration a masterclass in maternal machination, Dylan's ruin a collateral carved from our shared sin, my flight a exile gilded but galled. Letters arrived sporadic, her postcards from Nassau's sands, blooming, darling, you too? Ignored in drawers with his appeals, forwarded unread. The betrayal's perfection chilled absolute, Hudson winds in memory's gale, leaving a residue that provoked debates in cafe corners. Over espresso shots and croissants flaked, I'd murmur to strangers of cities that devour their own, their nods a chorus to the universal hunt for heaven's sliver, victims veiled in triumph's sheen. Spring bloomed defiant, sane banks greening under tentative suns, my gallery queries bearing fruit, a permanent spot in a Pigalle collective, walls to curate voices like mine, unyoked by fortune's foul. Yet the finale's echo persisted, a low hum under the city's chanson. Who'd truly sunk in that sound's embrace, the plunged, the imprisoned, or the one adrift in gold's cage? Paris lights twinkled complicit at dusk, Eiffel pulsing like a heart unscarred, but in the garret's hush, the question lingered, bitterness a vintage uncorked eternal, urging whispers to the wind, in this eternal scrum for sky, who claims the victim, and who the void?